We're honoring moms today, obviously. And part of that, I think, is recognizing that being a mom's a tough job. And especially with some of us as kids, right? And I don't know, moms, maybe if you've ever had those frustrating times, those times where it got difficult, going through a difficult time, or just a really stressful morning. Well, I happen to find some things that moms have said that after they said it, it probably sounded a little strange. But it was just that it was a little, moms are kind of, typically they'd be normal, rational, intelligent ladies, but being a mom just can kind of take and turn your brain to jello at times. And so I found these sayings, and afterwards the moms thought, well, that actually probably sounded pretty strange. For example, this is kind of a list of moms where they could write in things that they had said throughout their day. One mom says, no, you can't mail your sister away. Let her out of the box. Or this mom said, get the noodles out between your toes and just eat them. One frustrated mom says, if I find one more fruit snack on the floor, I'm never giving you food again. That seems a little rash, a little extreme. One mom said, here's the first thing about money. We don't carry it around when we're naked and don't have pockets. Well, that's good advice, Yeah. What are you supposed to do? If you could not put boogers on my sweatshirt, that would be awesome. We're not having this this one was kind of funny. You're not getting into my car until you get that spider out of your pocket. The car is kind of the most important thing there, I guess. One mom says, if you call me a juice bag again, you're going into timeout. I thought this one was funny. Honey, don't lick the dog. Okay, see, now you have dog fur on your tongue. I told you he wouldn't taste very good, didn't I? And here's the last one. We're not having this conversation until you're wearing underpants. So you got to have a certain standard there, I guess. All right. Well, we do appreciate our moms. We thank you for your work. We thank you for your sacrifices, and just all that you give, all you do, how you guide, how you provide wisdom. We all have a mom, and so we all have something to be thankful for. Over the last few weeks, as I mentioned, we've been revisiting this Easter story. And I want to say again, this outline or these ideas have been inspired by Rick Warren in a sermon that he gave on Easter Sunday called Easter is the Answer. And I just found it rather profound because he shared that 1 year ago his son took his own life, very tragically, just 5 days after Easter. And if you follow the goings on in the Christian world, you may remember that story. And so when I heard his message, just the same weekend that we had buried my own stepmother, I just found immediate interest, and I found the information just really helpful. I just thought it was so good, and I wanted to make sure I could share it, because we all experience those tough times. We all go through those difficult days, those difficulties of life. And we find in the Easter story a pattern, if you will, a model of what we can do and what we should do when we face the struggles of our lives. Jesus showed us a pathway through the dark times of life. We see what he did. We see what took place. We see how he prepared them and how the story walked them through this difficult time. For Jesus, we saw that the Friday was a day of pain. That was a day of his arrest, trial, the beatings, ultimately the crucifixion on the cross. And Jesus faced immeasurable physical pain, we understand, but he also faced great emotional pain, relational pain, and spiritual pain as well. The deepest pain on every level, in every way, Jesus went through it on his Friday of pain, the day of the cross. But through this experience, we're given an example of what we need to do during those times in our life when we struggle, when we go through hard times, when we hit that wall. And we learned that we need to reach out to trusted friends and to reach out to God. And we talked about that. The next day was a day of confusion and fear. In our discussion last week, we looked at how the disciples had fallen into great confusion. They were followers of Jesus, and they put in their trust and all their hope in Jesus. And they really believed in and understood him to be the Messiah, the one that would lead his people to glory and to victory. But when Jesus was buried in a tomb, the disciples were lost. They didn't know what to do, what to think about this. He was their teacher, their master, their Messiah, and he was gone. And they felt lost. You know, it seems in our lives that when we experience those times of confusion and those times of fear, it's an easy time for people to fall away from faith. Or maybe for others, they want to hang on to a belief and a sense that there is a God. But even if they do, if we don't understand how to get through that time, how to get through that day, then it's easy to fall into the crazy cycle of pain and confusion, days of sorrow and days of discouragement and doubt, days where we're let down and hurt, and days of fear. And we go back and forth from one to another, around and around and around. And it seems like there are times like this that we need to learn what to do to get through those kinds of days. Because we want to get to the day of joy if we don't get stuck there, if we don't get lost there. But there's specific things we need to do. And we said to get through the day of confusion, we need to learn how to hold on to God's promises to get you through those times when you feel like your future's unsure. See, God has promised that you are his child. God has promised that he loves you. God has promised that he has plans for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. God has promised to lead you out of temptation when you need it. God has promised eternal life to those that believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. And we need to learn how to hang on to those promises. So, we know what to do in the days of pain. We know how to get through the days of confusion. Now we want to learn how to get to the day of joy. And that's where we want to be. That's where we're hoping to find. That's where we hope we're going. And there's a path, there's a way we can make it. We don't have to be lost in the darkness forever because Jesus has told us things in the light that help us get through it. You know, for disciples, it was Sunday that they received their day of joy. It was early in the morning. Two ladies had gone back out to the tomb of Jesus. They were probably still in shock, trying to sort out in their mind the events of the last couple of days. I mean, just imagine all that they'd experienced, all the conversations that they had had. We had noticed last week that on that day of confusion, they just went out and sat at the grave looking at it. They were just so stunned by what was going on. And now it's Sunday morning. They're still in shock, but they're going back out to the burial site of Jesus. They want to honor him. They take some spices to further prepare his body. But when they get there, they discover that the stone covering the tomb of Jesus had been rolled away. They go inside the tomb, and the body is gone. Then they come out, and they're greeted by a couple of men that are glowing in this brilliant white. And as you might imagine, this is a rather terrifying event. Looking at it from this side of history, kind of looking back, we know what happened. We know how it's going to turn out. We know what Jesus is doing. But step into their shoes for just a moment and imagine what it was like to go out to the tomb again and experience this. As I said, this series was partly inspired by the fact that my stepmother had passed away just a few weeks ago. And for us, interestingly enough, her body was delivered to the cemetery on a Friday. Then on Saturday, We held a memorial service for her at Lidgerwood Presbyterian Church. And then it was Sunday afternoon that some of the family got together and we drove out to the cemetery for the first time to visit her final resting place. As we drove out there, I can tell you that though it was not what we wanted, we did fully expect to discover a new grave with a placard on it that said this was her final resting place, and that we could go and we could pay our respects, we could maybe pray together, we could leave our flowers, we could bring some closure to our loss, and that's exactly what we found. Can you imagine if we would have found something different? Can you imagine if we go out there and found the grave had been opened back up and the body was gone? Because that's exactly what Mary Magdalene and the other Mary found when they visited the tomb of Jesus. Expecting the same experience, that he was still there, but yet the tomb is open. His body is gone, and if it wasn't confusing enough, now these men appear out of nowhere and their bodies are literally glowing. And the text tells us that they were afraid at this point, but then something amazing happens, and the angel tells the women what was going on, that Jesus had risen from the grave just as he said he would. That he's alive. The death did not win its victory. The grave did not hold him any longer. The Messiah had returned, and Jesus had come back to life, and they were to go and tell the others what had happened. So look at Matthew chapter 28. In verse 8, it says, "So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid," and we can understand that, "yet they were filled with joy, and they ran to tell the disciples." And when it's talking about they hurried away and they ran, that's exactly what they did. They were rushing back towards town, excited and delighted. And it's true. Everything that Jesus said was true. Everything that Jesus had taught them and showed them was true. And we see this great joy in them. And we want to learn how to get there ourselves. When we face our own days of strife and pain, when we go through those tough times, how can we get to that kind of moment of joy? We can do that, but we need to fully understand where the joy comes from. And it's so simple and yet so profound. You see, in actuality, when we look at this particular story, the women, later the disciples, all get their day of joy. But it's not because of anything that they had done. It's not because of any of them. It's only because of the resurrection power of Jesus that they found their joy. And that's the answer. How do you get to your day of joy? How do you get to that joy? You have to realize the only way to do it is when you learn how to rely on the power of Jesus at work in your own life. You realize that you can't get there on your own. You realize you can't get there by yourself. When you come to that place where you're at the end of your rope and there's nothing left but Jesus, and you hang on to him. You see, many of us are on kind of the self-improvement plan. How easy it is to be thinking, you know what? I just need to pull myself up. You know what I got to do? I just got to work harder. I just need to do one more thing, make one more phone call, do one more thing, just be a little bit busier. If I just wait a little bit longer, maybe I can get over this. And the power is only in Jesus. And you need to learn how to rely upon him. To get through the worst days of your life, and this is just kind of a little bit of a recap, but putting Jesus into the whole story. What we need to do is we need to learn how to reach out to the presence of Jesus. We need to remember the promises of Jesus. And we need to learn how to rely upon the power of Jesus. I've shared at other times some of my ministry journeys. And we were serving in Southern California down in Whittier. and we're there for about 7 years, and then we moved to a northern suburb of Sacramento at Citrus Heights. My peeps are here this morning from Citrus Heights. Jessica and David, many of you have met before, and Jessica was in our youth group there. Her mom on staff, and her stepdad, pastor down there at Antelope Road. But you know, when I moved from Whittier to Sacramento, I really felt like a failure in ministry. I can't explain all of it because I love the kids and I love the work that we were doing. Yet somehow I was leaving pretty depleted and pretty empty and feeling like it just had not gone well in a lot of ways. And I was really feeling the pressure of maybe I don't know what I'm doing, maybe I'm not doing a very good job. And then to add to that, I moved from an inner city church outreach type ministry where probably 80% of the students in the youth group were from neighborhoods, and even some of them were gang kids and street kids, most of them broken homes and very difficult situations. And I moved from that kind of ministry to a suburban middle class church with a bunch of church brats growing up inside of it. Not Jessica, but the other ones. The other ones. Since you're here today, I needed to clarify. No, she wasn't. She was a sweetheart. But there were a few, right? And so what a change. So here I'm struggling, but I moved from this inner city type ministry to this suburban type ministry. And when I got there, I was following a very beloved youth pastor. And the students, the parents, and the staff were still, mourning over the fact that he was gone. And I was kind of this unimpressive replacement. And I was quickly devolving into depression. It was a time for me where the pain was growing, and a time for me when I was ready to give up on the whole thing. I did not want to serve in ministry anymore. My confidence was shot. I felt like I was ineffective and inadequate. I was just not in a good place. But I learned one thing while I was there. I was starting to pick up on here, but one of the things that I really loved and was learning while at Antelope was how to worship and how to call upon the name of my Savior and experience His presence in my life. I was learning how to quit going to church and how to start doing church. I was starting to learn that I didn't want to know about Jesus. I wanted to know Jesus. I was starting to realize that I didn't need any more information filling my brain that didn't become a reality in my heart. I was beginning to pick up on this. I was beginning to understand that I could actually be in the presence of Jesus Christ, and I could rely upon His power in my life. And when I spoke, I wanted His words to come out of my mouth. And when I served, I wanted to be His hands that were touching the lives of other people around me. And I was beginning to realize, and it's a journey that I still feel like I'm only beginning, and I'm going to take the rest of my life trying to figure out what it really looks like and what it's really supposed to be. But I was beginning to realize it had to be less about me and more about Him. And it's the only place I started to find healing. And the only reason I'm standing here today sharing any of these words with you is because I learned to rely upon His power instead of my own. Because I was ready to be done. John chapter 11, verses 25 and 26 says, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Talk about hope. Talk about a promise. When the disciples realized the power of Jesus to resurrect himself from the dead, they realized this was a game changer. This was going to change everything about who they were and what they believed and how they lived. This was going to move it all. I mean, after Jesus had come from that tomb, Jesus met with them. Jesus went fishing with them. There's stories where he's walking down the road talking to some new people and eating meals with them. Jesus performed miracles again. There's even a story, a time when Jesus gathered with a crowd of 500 people, spending the afternoon with them and teaching them. And yet just a few days before, his dead, lifeless body was laying in the ground. You know, if Jesus has the power to resurrect himself from the grave, what can he do in your life? I believe he can resurrect a dead marriage. I believe he can resurrect a dead career. I think he can resurrect a poor self-esteem. I think he can resurrect a sense of hope if that's what you need. He can resurrect a broken heart. Jesus can resurrect you to joy when you learn how to hang on to him. Are you relying upon him today? Are you trusting in him and really putting your life into his hands? Realizing that he is bigger than you could ever be. You know, one last scripture from Paul. He writes in Philippians 3:10. He says, I want to know, will we find that one? Did I put it in there? Okay, I'll just share it with you. In Philippians 3:10, he says, I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participate in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining the resurrection from the dead. Now think about what he's saying here. As we unpack that just a little bit, he's saying, I want to know Christ. And if it requires that I go through suffering and difficult times and tough times, if it means going through pain just to know Jesus, then so be it. I'm willing to walk whatever valley I need to walk and take whatever path I need to take, because what I want to do is to know Christ. Because he knew that if he knew Christ and if he had fellowship even in his sufferings, then he could also find the resurrection in his life. And by trusting in Jesus, relying upon the power of Jesus, even to take him through the difficult times, he would be able to participate also in his joy. And that's what we want to do. Do you know the joy of relying upon the power of Jesus in your life? To seek him in every day. To want to draw closer to him. That every time you reach that difficult time, that tough spot, you go through that hardship, whether it's just in the day-to-day grind and the stress and dealing with neighbors or coworkers or family and stuff just not working out the way it is, and it starts to wear down at you, chipping on you a little bit each and every day. Or maybe it's a much bigger wall and you got some news this week that you were not expecting, that came out of nowhere and it sent you spinning. Either way, we learn how to rely upon the power of Jesus. I want to invite you to share in a time of prayer with me. I'd like this prayer to maybe be a little bit different. See, most weeks I pray for you. Most weeks when we end, I just want to send you with a prayer kind of, and I'll let you into my little secret. My prayer at the end is usually a short little summary of the sermon. Maybe a little reminder, but it's a little prayerful way to walk through what we've just talked about and asking God's power and presence to just fall upon you. But this week I'd like to pray with you. And I want to change this prayer, and I want to shorten it up and and maybe do it in some chunks, and invites you to share this prayer in your heart. Just in your thoughts. That as we share in this prayer together, if you want to start learning how to rely upon the power of Jesus, that you would take this prayer and you would make it your own. Let's bow.